vitamin A is not a vitamin. It is alcohol and an aldehyde, and potentially a vaccine adjuvant, right? So now you know you have to avoid it. It is a carcinogen and it causes genetic mutations leading to cancer and birth defects. And step one is to avoid it. Step two, the mistake that most people make is thinking that, oh, just avoiding it is going to solve the problem. No, if you're already symptomatic, not enough. It's going to help you, prevent you from getting worse. But in 2 years of research, it's what it took to figure out how to actually help people get this stuff out of their system safely and effectively. Because the fact of the matter is that, you can become acutely poisoned and die from aldehydes, just like you can become acutely poisoned and die from alcohol. So your body has a very specific biochemical pathway and does a lot of work to prevent you from dying in the detoxification process. So I do not recommend anybody does this willy-nilly. And to benefit from my 2 years of research and clinical experience, do it right, get the results just like, my clients on my website who saw relief in a matter of days without harmful or unforeseen side effects.
Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Josef Funke. I'm with the Collaborative Commons. The Collaborative Commons is a place where we meet, where we share access to collaborative resources, methods, models, tools, and relationships. We cover a variety of subjects, leadership development, and also mental wellness and health. And today we're talking to my friend Eric Levinson, who is in New York. He is a holistic health practitioner. We know each other. We go back a decade when I was managing the Tree of Life Rejuvenation Center, which is a holistic educational wellness center. Back then he was working in the apothecary, or we called it the dispensary, with all the different tinctures and supplementations and nutritions. He's a wizard, and I've always had huge respect for your knowledge. You're an extremely smart person with a giant heart. And we started talking recently. I sent out some messages on Facebook Messenger about what to do about COVID-19 and how we can protect ourselves or boost our immunity. And Eric reached out and said, you know what, I have some information that I can share with you. And maybe we can get on a call. And I said, when we get on a call, I don't want to just be the sole recipient of this information. Would you be open for us recording this here for our community? Because they might also gain some value from this. So on our call with us is also Scott Winter. He's my business partner and co-founder of the Collaborative Commons. And so Eric, I'll hand it over to you, and then Scott and I will be asking questions as we go along. And you said that you had a presentation also that you wanted to share.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you guys taking the time and helping me get this message out. Obviously, I want to preface this by saying I'm not a medical doctor. I am just a very committed and passionate human being. And, I've just worked really hard to improve and maintain my own health and that of my family, and that information consistently proves useful to other people. Now, about 2 years ago, I saw a post about somebody who had really bad reaction to a drug called Accutane. And the alarm bells went off for me because I was given Accutane in middle school. And when I finally traced back my history to that period in my life, that was when my mental health and my physical health really took a dive for the worse. So, it really helped me put a lot of stuff together, and I started going down the rabbit hole and researching. And I learned that Accutane is actually a derivative of what we commonly call vitamin A. It's in a class of chemicals called retinoids. And specifically, it's a trans retinoic acid. And what I then came to discover is that, yeah, that has a lot of very well documented bad, nasty effects, and they become chronic. So you don't just get poisoned acutely the way I had been. It actually can stay with you and affect you your entire life. All right. So now I will, I'll share my screen. Okay. And oops. Okay, so this is just a simple diagram of how all mammals metabolize vitamin A or retinoids. And it all comes from beta carotene. That's how it's created in nature. And some of that will go directly to be stored in your liver. And some of it will be broken down into retinal. So they truncate this, but this is actually retinaldehyde. Okay, so you go Wikipedia and you type in retinal, you'll say it's also known as retinaldehyde. That aldehyde part that they truncate is the most important thing, because that means that it is chemically very similar to all of the other aldehydes. All right. So we break that down to retinaldehyde. It can then be broken down further into retinol, which is an alcohol, vitamin A alcohol. And this is actually the exact same metabolic pathway as alcohol. Now, if your body can't get rid of this to elimination, it will store it as a fat-soluble molecule. And your body will change your metabolism with your liver so that you will actually produce more fat. This is basically why people become sensitive to sugar and eventually develop diabetes, which I'll show in the literature as well. So now, if you can get it out of your body, you'll turn it into retinoic acid, which can then become trans-cis-retinoic acid, which is Accutane. Okay, so if we go to isotretinoin, this is Accutane. It's a cis-retinoic acid. So the takeaway from that is that your body is making Accutane from an aldehyde. Okay. So now we have to make it into an oxidized species to eliminate it, and we'll talk about that. If this system is broken, basically the aldehyde retinoids just kind of circulate around and they never get out of your system. So your liver will get fatter, your body will produce more fat to try to store it until it can get rid of it. Okay? So are aldehydes dangerous? Well, yes. In Europe, they're classified as carcinogenic. They cause damage to fertility and birth defects. Okay. In the United States, we have the Environmental Working Group that has been warning people for years not to combine vitamin A and sun exposure. And in fact, when people go on Accutane, they tell them stay out of the sun. Right? So here's Accutane. We now know your body makes. It has a close resemblance to retinoic acid, a natural vitamin A derivative. Here are the adverse effects. The first one they talk about is that you are more susceptible to bacterial infection. We'll cover that again. But also anemia, which is something my wife was actually afflicted with during pregnancy when she started taking a multivitamin with vitamin A in it. But also you can see that it affects the blood and reduces the white blood cells. Causes allergic reactions, we'll talk about that. Hypersensitivity, a lot of people with having chemical hypersensitivity, especially children with neurological and developmental disorders. And here we have that it causes diabetes, like I was talking about. So I love to tell people sugar is not the problem. It's all of the fruits and vegetables that are loaded with vitamin A. It's not all of them, just the ones that are very high in them, right? And other sources. But look at the psychiatric symptoms. Depression, anxiety, aggressive tendencies, abnormal behavior, psychotic and suicidal behavior, headaches, drowsiness, right? Problems with the eyes, conjunctivitis, eye infections, dry eyes and eye irritation, okay? Negatively impacts vision.
What are some of these vegetables, or what are some of these fruits and vegetables with high content of vitamin A?
Yeah, so foods that are high in beta carotene, right? Like they put a little picture of carrots here. Foods that are like liver from animals, because we store the retinoids and aldehydes in our liver, okay? Mangoes, dark leafy greens. There's a lot. That's part of what I help people understand is like, okay, well, you're never going to completely eliminate these, but you can learn to avoid the more pernicious sources of them, right?
Okay. No idea.
Yeah. Neither did I. And I had been actually acutely poisoned.
Are you saying like dark leafy greens, like kale, or like, is that something?
They could,
Yeah.
they could definitely pose a problem for people, especially if they are further along in the toxicity, right? If they have more, if they present more of these symptoms, they're going to be more sensitive to foods like that.
Okay.
Right? And we'll get into how that happens. Look at the gastrointestinal issues. All right. Pancreatitis, right? Again, back to the diabetes, okay? But inflammation throughout the digestive tract, even bleeding, right? And that's why I've seen people, in my program who had all of these issues almost immediately go away. And they wonder at the beginning how they were going to have bowel movements without, their kale and kale smoothies and, steamed spinach and all their, high fiber leafy greens. But what they began to quickly understand is that those foods were really just irritating their digestive tract. And we took away the irritants and everything started working properly. And they started having natural bowel movements without having to depend on high fiber irritants. Okay.
Oh, because I remember us relating during the fasting, green juice fasting period, that these are acting as brooms, basically, working through your body. But you're saying that's more of an irritant rather than a cleansing aspect.
I would say less like a broom and more like steel wool. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. All right. And look, even hepatitis, right? So the liver inflammation. And so when you start to realize, okay, well, the retinoids are essentially alcohol. They present all the same symptoms and disease pathologies as somebody who chronically consumes alcohol, including fatty liver disease, okay? Major problems with the skin, especially photosensitivity, so like the propensity to have like sunburn, okay? Problems with nails, hair loss, right? Dry and itchy skin. Increased sweating, which you see a lot with people who are overweight and tend to have diabetes and things like that. Okay. Now this is where, it got really interesting for me because I had been treating joint pain, muscle pain, back pain, mechanically, right? Helping people with their posture and getting some benefit, but seeing that a lot of people, because of these issues, which I hadn't been addressing, never got better. They never got out of pain, no matter how perfect their posture was. That's because this was not addressed. And now when I'm working with people and I start them on this, addressing this first, no matter how bad their alignment and other issues are, most of their pain is gone very quickly, okay? As this gets worse, this is related to causing arthritis and calcification. So I can also relate this back to like why nobody has a healthy vitamin D level anymore, and I'll show you that connection, okay?
And what you're saying is here that you structurally treated symptoms rather than addressing the root cause.
Exactly.
What actually caused these symptoms that are oftentimes in the allopathic or traditional Western medicine world is what we treat.
Yeah, so I want to do the least to get the most benefit. And when I see something, when you see this, right, and how many problems this can cause, all right, let's address this first and then see what's left over. Okay?
So you're acting like water, like choosing the path of least resistance somehow, because you're saying
Yeah.
you do the least, but you want the most. So you're
Yep.
actually you're following the natural flow of things,
Right.
rather than fighting something and blocking something or being more
Yeah, exactly.
invasive.
And that's why, people like myself and my clients that say, oh man, I've struggled with these XYZ issues that are probably on this list for years or decades. Once we begin to address this within days, we see improvement. The body is very adept at dealing with this toxicity. The problem is that we are culturally and societally overwhelming this system to such a degree and such an extent that we're seeing a massive catastrophic collapse of this process.
Interesting, because I always say, like, we got to create the preconditions for our potential to manifest. And what we witnessed at the Tree of Life when we offered green juice fasting, again, we created preconditions for the body actually to activate its innate healing mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So people healed themselves or their pancreas, or restored the function of their pancreas within just a matter of a few days.
Right.
Who were suffering with type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, or people who were extremely depressed, coming to the Tree of Life and doing the mental wellness program. After a few days, they could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they were happy and hopeful. And again, so it's interesting that you're saying, again, creating the preconditions. We sometimes need to stop harming the body and putting it into a survival mode. I mean, we are pretty resistant and resilient, but we gotta, if we eliminate that, then the body actually has the ability to restore its optimum health. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And I mean, specifically with this issue, which I'll go into a little bit more, but literally every cell in your body that has mitochondria, so excluding just your red blood cells, your mitochondria have two primary functions: one, to make ATP for energy, and two, to make aldehyde dehydrogenase. And I'll explain what that is and why that's so important in just a second. But that's how important it is that the part of your cellular biology that if it shut down, you would just die, right? If you stop making ATP, the organism would fail. They will shift to dealing with aldehyde toxicity. And that is part of why we see drowsiness, right? And all these other issues, because we're seeing basically it's like rolling brownouts in Los Angeles, right? Where there's just not enough consistent energy to power all of the systems if we are constantly dealing with this toxic burden, okay? And just to sum this up, we see also increased cholesterol, right? And increased blood sugar, okay? So now, what is aldehyde dehydrogenase? All right, so now we've established that vitamin A, retinoids are in the same class as alcohol and aldehydes. All right, so most people are familiar with formaldehyde, highly toxic, carcinogenic, causes birth defects, all that stuff. So the dehydrogenase enzyme is what turns it from the alcohol. Methanol becomes formaldehyde, right? Retinaldehyde comes from retinol, which is the vitamin A alcohol. Goes back and forth. You can see the arrows go both ways here, and they go both ways here. They only go one way here, out. But if we turn it into retinoic acid and we don't have the oxidizing species, we don't eliminate it, and then it becomes trans and it becomes far more toxic. Same thing with formaldehyde. If we turn it into formic acid and this builds up, look at what is the oxidizing species. Folinic acid. This is the fully reduced form of folic acid, the same vitamin that we give to pregnant ladies to prevent birth defects. So sure, giving them folic acid would be a good idea, but I would say probably a better idea would be to reduce their aldehyde toxicity. Just like we would tell them to stop drinking alcohol, we might want to suggest that pregnant ladies stop consuming vitamin A alcohol. And in fact, in some Northern European countries, they've actually started making those recommendations. They are telling pregnant women to stop consuming foods that are high in vitamin A, like liver, and to not take prenatal vitamins that contain vitamin A. So what do aldehydes do? Well, the EPA has been studying their effects just on breathing for a very long time. And we know that they damage the cells lining the airways, and they prompt white blood cells to enter the lungs. Sounds consistent with what people who are having worse reactions to COVID-19 are having, right? Formaldehyde poisoning symptoms, okay? Affects the respiratory system, bronchitis, asthma, and pneumonia. So if somebody has aldehydes in their system and then they get the virus, is the virus causing the symptoms, or is it the aldehydes? Well, we've taken a deep look at that to see what is actually going on. And when they looked at dengue fever, which is also caused by a virus that affects primarily the liver, they found that there was an interreaction there where the virus triggered the stored retinoids to go into circulation by spilling from the liver and caused an endogenous form of hypervitaminosis A. We'll take a look at that in a second. That manifested the signs and the symptoms of the disease, which included fever, severe joint and bone pain, capillary leakage, thrombocytopenia. Again, that's like the reduced immune system, okay? Headache and gastrointestinal symptoms. So what they're saying here is that the virus is not itself causing the symptoms. The virus, because of how they evolved with mammals, figured out that they could take advantage of the innate toxicity of the mammals to suppress the immune system and improve its ability to reproduce in the mammal, okay? Now, capillary leakage, which can directly affect the lungs, the capillaries in the lungs start to burst and leak fluid into the lungs, okay, causing edema. That can happen anywhere in the body. So, this is a paper from 1949 about hypervitaminosis A and scurvy. And we now know that, like in China, and people here are being recommended too, to take high doses of vitamin C to treat the more pernicious symptoms of COVID-19. Well, we've never found a mechanism for how vitamin C improves the immune system or fights infection, but we do know for nearly 70 years that vitamin C does mitigate the toxic effects of vitamin A poisoning or hypervitaminosis A. And in fact, what they are saying here in this study is that scurvy is actually not a deficiency of vitamin C, it is a toxicity of vitamin A. So they poisoned animals and they had the same post-mortem findings as human scurvy, okay, which started off as general malady, just in general being unwell, changes to their skin and their coat, drowsiness, muscular weakness, decreased activity, okay? And eventually it caused major muscular weakness, pain in the limbs, hemorrhaging, diarrhea, okay? Liver and kidney damage, and damage to the teeth, okay? So what this is establishing is that giving people with COVID-19 high doses of vitamin C is actually just addressing this issue and giving their immune system a fighting chance to get rid of the virus before the hypervitaminosis A and aldehyde toxicity kills them. The virus only causes localized damage. Wherever the actual virus is, it's taking over your cells, hijacking them to reproduce itself, which damages just those cells. The systemic damage is this. Now,
so what you're saying, the vitamin C is kind of counterbalancing the harmful effects of the vitamin A, and instead the better strategy would be to reduce, again, the intake of vitamin A
Right.
You can still boost vitamin C, but it doesn't. It would be more effective to just like eliminate vitamin A, because that's the only correlation that there is with vitamin C, that it actually counterbalances the harmful effects. Interesting.
Yeah. And realistically, you know, if you are going to catch COVID-19 and have a really bad response to it, you know, it's too late to start doing an aldehyde detox. So take the vitamin C, right? Obviously, again, prefacing, not a doctor, but that's what I would do for myself. Okay. Luckily, at this point, I've done significant detox with this. And, you know, to point out here, you know, same with COVID-19, they're finding that the younger children are not as severely impacted by the virus. Why is that? They are not as toxic with the vitamin A and the aldehydes. There's not enough there for the virus to work with. Same thing happens in dengue fever. Not a coincidence. Now, what do we know about aldehydes and the elderly? Well, you might know that kind of familiar smell that older people have. That is from aldehydes, nonenal. Okay? So as people age, if they're not fixing this problem, the aldehydes continue to build up in their system and they develop more and more diseases and symptoms of this toxicity. So I was going to talk about capillary leak syndrome, but basically that it causes the edema and the pneumonia, right? So this is from 1989, and it was research done in Russia. But basically they were studying ways to improve the reproduction of viruses in the laboratory for studying them. So they figured out that a concentration of 0.001 to 0.005%, I mean, that is like almost nothing, right? Of retinoic acid injected into the growth culture medium. It considerably raised the cell sensitivity to animal, entero, and coronaviruses. So in order to reproduce a virus in the lab, you have to get the virus into the cells. That's what they're talking about there. Considerably raise the sensitivity. Okay? Increased the concentrations in the cultural medium. All right? So obviously I'm bridging a gap here. This is what's happening in the laboratory. Well, if that's also happening in a living person, if you have retinoic acid in your body, which your body makes from beta carotene, you're turning yourself into a much more viable petri dish for reproducing coronavirus.
And it's just a minimal amount.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if you like, once you put that into like a gallon of water or something, if you could even measure that, right? And that's almost not even existent.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need a lot of this. So if you have some of the other symptoms of vitamin A toxicity, you can probably assume you might have a higher concentration of that in your tissues, right? Now, you know, this has a major effect on a lot of systems in the body. People are, you know, very obsessed with glutathione these days and why they can't seem to get enough of it and they want to inject it into their veins. Well, here we see that the addition of retinoic acid to the cultures decreased the intracellular levels of glutathione and cysteine. That's not going to do well for your health and longevity. Let's see. So, what is hypervitaminosis A? It's a very well understood, however, most often overlooked problem. Signs and symptoms. We see that it negatively affects bone development. Okay, and as we saw, for older people, it softens the bones as well. It damages your vision, causes bone pain and swelling. the bulging fontanelle. We'll take a picture, we'll take a look at an actual picture of what that looks like in a second. Changes in consciousness. I just love that they call this. This is the understatement of the year. When we talk about changes in consciousness, we see 3 independent lines of evidence suggest retinoids are causal to schizophrenia. I would call that a serious change in consciousness. Decreased appetite. So for a long time, I was doing like intermittent fasting and following like a somewhat keto and doing all that stuff. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'm like never hungry. But I was eating a lot of high vitamin A foods, dark leafy greens, cheese, eggs, liver, right? And my night vision was getting terrible. Constant headaches, right? How is it affecting the digestion? Calcification. How is it affecting the heart? Calcification. Okay, this is really leading to arteriosclerosis and arthritis. Okay, we'll touch on hypercalcemia in a second. All right, but people who have a lot of pain and pressure in the head, okay, and swelling, general irritability, people who want to fight each other over rolls of toilet paper, all right, and liver damage, just like alcohol, okay. Nausea, now you can start to see like this is affecting the whole body, head to toe, right? Poor weight gain in children, skin and hair changes that we talked about, hair loss, sensitivity to light, peeling skin. I mean, so many kids now that are having like eczema and really bad skin problems, things like that, okay? All that good stuff. All right, so now we see that it causes also hypercalcemia. This is a fun one. What are the symptoms of hypercalcemia? Heart problems, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, loss of appetite, abdominal pain, kidney problems. I don't know, everybody's grandmother has problems waking up to pee all night long, right? Urination at night. Okay, but then it becomes psychiatric, emotional instability, confusion, delirium, psychosis, stupor, right? It can even cause comas, cardiac arrest. So regulating calcium in the blood is a very important function of the body. And that's where vitamin D comes in, right? That controls how much calcium you absorb from your diet and maintaining that balance with certain other hormones related to thyroid and everything. And so if we are giving ourselves hypercalcemia and consuming high vitamin A foods and certain foods like nightshades that contain basically vitamin D, we are creating this biochemical condition in our body all the time. And so, over the last few years, there have been a lot of articles about conspiracy theories about, holistic doctors that are suddenly dropping dead from heart attacks. And people are trying to say, oh, Big Pharma or somebody, just murdered them. They were so healthy. Well, if they were doing everything wrong, consuming high beta carotene, high vitamin A diets, maybe taking supplements that contain them, and taking a vitamin D supplement, and eating things like nightshades, they just gave themselves a heart attack. Here it is. No conspiracy theory.
No, an alternative theory.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Making progress. All right. So now we talked about birth defects. So you probably heard of fetal alcohol syndrome, right? That's here. Fetal retinoid syndrome is almost identical. Okay, it causes defects in the cardiovascular system and neurological development, as well as, in the worst cases, major physical deformities. Okay, but you can see here, they can be pretty subtle. small eye openings, shortening of the nose, thinner upper lip. They lose that little dimple here under the nose. Flattening of the midface of the bone here doesn't form properly. Okay, and these types of, all these things here. So we already talked about schizophrenia. And, we have a lot of people who are, obviously very afraid of vaccines these days. Well, potential use of retinoic acid as an oral vaccine adjuvant. Okay, so we've already seen how it affects the immune system. Well, they know that they can use this to create the same sort of immune reaction you'd get from a vaccine. So you can put a bunch of retinoic acid in a little shot with some, deactivated polio, and boom, you're vaccinated against polio. All right. What kind of implications does that have? Well, we know that women who have taken oral contraceptives have increased levels of serum vitamin A. Not going to go into this too much, but essentially any sort of hormone therapy, whether it's, taking estrogen and progesterone, or steroids, or skin problems, or steroid inhaler, or thyroid hormones, or taking bioidentical hormones, or desiccated, adrenals and things like that, you're going to get a very similar response, elevated serum A. Okay.
What about peptides and things like that? Because I hear that that's also gaining in some popularity, like human growth hormones and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, anything that you're going to take as a hormone that your body doesn't produce itself, right, that came from outside of you, is going to have this effect. Okay. In fact, one woman who started my program not too long ago had been experimenting with those neuropeptides, and then was taking them certain amount of time in between dosages. So she's like, well, I think they were helping me before, so I want to continue. I was like, okay, well, let's see what happens. So she took another dose after she started my program and was like, okay, that was awful. I'm not doing that again.
So she developed a sensitivity because she eliminated some vitamin A foods and supplementations, and then she became more sensitive to when she actually was doing something harmful to her body. That there was
she felt so awful before she started my program. She felt so awful she couldn't tell if the neuropeptides were making her feel more awful or not. So when she started feeling better, she realized that it was not helping. All right.
So a good strategy is actually to try it out, right? For a period of time, eliminating some of these foods and then adding them back in again, and then actually seeing how that affects you. Because I remember when I was a strict raw foodist and I eliminated also all sugars out of my diet, we once went to a family reunion in Oklahoma where there was just no access to any fresh foods. And I was just experimenting with it. I was eating some eggs, and I actually felt like in the consciousness of almost like a chicken when I was eating these eggs. So I had such a sensitivity to it. Or we ate some ice cream in the evening, and my eyesight was getting blurry because of the sugar and the dairy inside of the ice cream. So my body had become so sensitive. Now I can eat all that crap without noticing anything. But back in the days, I had just created an ecology that was a bit purer and allowed me to just feel these responses.
That was a great segue to the next topic.
All right.
Inhibition of dehydrogenase. So you mentioned two foods specifically that are high in vitamin A, egg yolks and dairy and ice cream, right? Now, what's interesting is that one of the ways that your body can create the oxidized species and get this stuff out is with an amino acid called taurine, which is not existent essentially outside of eating muscle meat unless you take a supplement. Okay, and that's why when they feed they make cat food, which is meat, typically with organ meat as well, like liver, and then they typically add fish oil to that, and then they add retinol palmitate, the synthetic form of vitamin A. Tons of vitamin A in cat food. They have to also supplement with a ton of zinc and taurine to counterbalance that toxicity. So the better bet would be just give them meat and stop adding all the high vitamin A stuff to it, right? So other ways that we can inhibit getting rid of this stuff are things like taking Tylenol, which recently, they've said there may be some sort of direct causative link between Tylenol and susceptibility to autism, right? Maybe you've read about that. Well, here is the mechanism that would contribute to the fetal retinoid syndrome, right? And all of those types of problems. And where is it? And then we see that, there's a pivotal role of aldehyde toxicity in autism. Okay. So again, retinoic acid is an adjuvant, induces inflammatory immunity. You could also read that as autoimmune disease. And here's the summary of this one. Gluten intolerance mechanism. They found what causes gluten intolerance. It's retinoic acid. Causes the cytokine storm that people have been talking about now in relation to COVID-19. But basically, you are immunizing yourself against gluten, causing celiac disease. Okay. So what are all of the diseases that are related to having dysfunction of your aldehyde dehydrogenase, overloading that system and then becoming toxic with aldehydes? Cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, stroke, cancer, pain, osteoporosis, and in general, the process of aging.
I mean, these are all the major causes of death.
Yeah.
In the United States and across the world.
Yep. Yeah. The ones that nobody's been able to figure out, but yet here, I mean, I didn't do this research. It's here. It's all here. I just had to go in and figure this out because I wasn't going to get answers anywhere else. So what's interesting is that, yes, cardiovascular diseases, right? And what do we give people who are older and at risk of cardiovascular disease? We give them aspirin, right? And again, inhibition of human alcohol and aldehyde dehydrogenases by aspirin. Probably the worst piece of advice you could give somebody with the risk of heart disease. Now, if you got pain, inflammatory pain, and giving people painkillers makes it worse.
So I heard that there was a correlation to ibuprofen, that people who are struggling with COVID-19 not to be taking ibuprofen. Is that something here that
so I started researching that line, and I didn't find anything very compelling. There was one piece of research I saw that said that ibuprofen has some sort of affinity for aldehyde dehydrogenase. So, maybe that would say that, like, if you're taking ibuprofen, it binds up your aldehyde dehydrogenase, but I don't present that. It wasn't that conclusive. It was kind of presumptive, but that would be my maybe that's what's happening.
Maybe. Okay.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that ALDH2 deficiency is actually a genetic defect. They call it a defect of about 30 to 40% of the Asian population. And as we saw, they have a very high susceptibility to this virus. But we also know that they have a much higher risk of liver disease, esophageal and gastric cancer, and Alzheimer's. This is part of how they started figuring out all this research, right, was making these determinations for that specific population and being able to study them specifically. Okay.
Could that be a reason why COVID-19 started in Asia? Because the population, the Asian population was more susceptible to it, so it kind of flared up earlier, rather than seeing it as a wave that originated in Wuhan and then traveled across the world?
It may be an explanation to why it was like more devastating there. And, you know, and I think that there obviously are populations outside of Asian populations that have this deficiency who would be creating the same conditions as the deficiency, right? So let's take, for example, people who live in northern Italy, where they have a very elderly population that eats a lot of tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, nightshades, right? A lot of dairy, a lot of pork, a lot of seafood, high vitamin A, aldehyde foods, right? So you can create the same susceptibility with diet or exposure to pollution, environmental factors, right? Dryer sheets are aldehydes, okay? And so I think...
Hold on, did you just say that the sheets that go into the dryer in order to make it less static are aldehyde?
Yeah.
Because I always forget.
Synthetic fragrances are aldehydes. And actually, most natural fragrances are aldehydes. They just might be, you know, maybe a little bit less toxic, a little bit more benign. But even like even cannabis, the terpenes that give the cannabis its aroma are aldehydes. And so that just goes to the point. You cannot completely eliminate them, but you can do a lot to give your aldehyde dehydrogenase system and the rest of your body a better fighting chance. Step 1, reducing them. Step 2, understanding the biochemistry of how to get it out of your system. Because once that system is overloaded and it's broken, the default is storing them. And that's why as people get older and sicker, they also tend to get fatter and have all the other comorbidities that we've been talking about, and the same comorbidities that make people more susceptible to death and complications from COVID-19. Okay. Now, this is also, I think, just important because so many people are anemic or just low energy, and there's a direct effect on iron metabolism, where a lot of retinoic acid basically forces the intestinal cells to retain iron, and that reduces its release into the bloodstream. And then with those cells become damaged, it releases the iron into the intestines. And if anybody's ever taken an iron pill, they know that causes serious constipation. And so this is a part of the back and forth with IBS, from constipation to diarrhea and all of the other discomfort. Okay. And then I just have to cover it because I get asked this. And what about when they give mega doses of vitamin A to people with like measles? Well, in India they stopped that because it was way more dangerous than the measles. The susceptibility and the risk of death from viruses has more to do with general malnutrition, lack of protein, right? Taurine and zinc are specifically implicated. And those are two of the essential nutrients to help protect you from the aldehyde toxicity of a viral infection. Okay? Now, what's interesting too is that when they did studies of populations that had previously had vitamin A supplementation, they found that if you gave them more vitamin A during an immune episode like this, you got way worse results. So obviously, if somebody already has higher levels of vitamin A in their body, and then you give them a mega dose more, you're going to get much worse response. Okay? So one of the things they're saying now is that the loss of smell is the first sign of COVID-19, which is also an early sign of Parkinson's disease. And there's that guy. As we see here, it's also directly related to Parkinsonism with aldehyde dehydrogenase as the neurodegenerative disease. Okay. Now the mechanism there is that, Parkinson's is understood as your body is not producing dopamine. Well, dopamine, when it's metabolized, becomes an aldehyde called dopal. Okay, so you need aldehyde dehydrogenase to help get the dopal out. If you're deficient in aldehyde dehydrogenase and otherwise toxic with aldehydes, your body has to stop producing dopamine. It's a negative feedback loop. Now, in Western medicine, we would give you a drug that would force you to produce dopamine, which would create more dopal, which would make you more toxic, right? Loss of smell, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Okay, so we see a mechanism here. They say it has to do with acetylcholine. Well, acetaldehyde is what your body makes from alcohol. And when there's more acetaldehyde, there's a disruption that has an effect on your acetylcholine. You start to become way over saturated with acetylcholine, and this is a major contributor to anxiety and insomnia, sleep issues, and general irritability. Acetylcholine is like an excitatory. Okay. So it's an ester of acetic acid. Acetic acid fits in right here with the formic acid and the retinoic acid. So people are getting the virus, they're becoming acutely aldehyde toxic, and they're giving themselves all of the diseases and conditions that we've just linked.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating, incredibly well presented and researched, and would you say, like, in what, like, who would you want this information to go out to primarily? Like, would you say it's the medical professionals? Is it it's dietitians? Like, who's obviously people who are struggling with some of the symptoms, right, or the diagnosed diseases that have been the symptoms that have been given a name. But who would you say, like, what's the prime audience for this here right now, other than everyone?
Yeah, well, I mean, essentially, if you're a mammal, because this includes not just humans, but our pets. My cat had major problems related to hypercalcemia caused by the high vitamin A in his diet, and so we had to switch him over, and now we've been able to stop that problem for him. And I remember my first dog, Mandy, when I was a kid, who literally had all of this, the hemorrhaging. I remember, the cancer and the hemorrhaging and all of that. So essentially, if you want to be healthy, and if you have, whether or not you have any of those symptoms yet, right? I mean, what this should elucidate is that it's the unavoidable progression unless you are actively avoiding it.
So what can you do to flush it out? What are some immediate steps that you can take that you would recommend here for anybody who is listening and recognizing that there's a plausible correlation between everything that you presented here, and they just want to physically themselves experiencing it? What can they do? What should be the number one steps?
Well, so step one would be avoiding, right?
Okay.
And here we have, like they talk about how they are able to treat this, so vitamin A or vitamin E and phosphatidylcholine, okay? And they talk about this in animals, but animals are mammals. It works in them too, and it works in us. Vitamin E, taurine, okay? Vitamin K.
Well, when you say avoiding, like what are the food groups that need to be avoided specifically? Do you have a PDF sheet? Can people get in touch with you and download that? Do you have information that we can provide?
Yes, absolutely. So, it's as simple as, if you really want to just know what to avoid, you can literally just Google, foods that are high in vitamin A and beta carotene, okay? And start cutting those out, including nightshades, including and especially nightshades, all right? And then realizing that, okay, avoiding is step one. Step two is understanding that if you are already even partially toxic and you have a lot of storage of this, it's going to take a little bit more work. So I do have a detoxification program that restarts this system. And then what you really have to realize is that, okay, from now on, I just have to continue to avoid these foods and eat a very simple but enjoyable diet that people doing this program love, because oh my gosh, now sugar's not the enemy, now gluten's not the enemy, right? It's a very easy to follow program, and within a few days, especially if you are having any acute symptoms, there is very fast relief. So anybody going on my website, can look at videos of testimonials.
And they can get in touch with you, they can email you, they can call you.
Yep.
That should be that you're interested in continuing the conversation, whether it's doctors, it's holistic practitioners, registered nurses, whoever is in this field.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, because I am working with other, practitioners who have, found me and found this information and want to learn about it. Especially, I work with people whose doctors, were completely stumped. And then, we saw immediate and drastic improvement in their patients following this program. And they were like, well, hey, what were you doing?
Got any question, anything you would like to add?
In addition to all the research that you put together, who are other pioneers in this field that you mean? Because again, the one byproduct. Oh, excuse me, real quick. I'm hearing double talk here for some reason. Okay, so I'm curious to know, like, who else? Again, you gave us a lot of resources and links that you went over, but are there other, medical clinics? Because again, my concern in anything is something that has. I mean, you have all these studies, but who is promoting this that has the medical background? Because it's hard to say, hey, I want to push this out there. You keep saying you're not a doctor, but you've done an amazing amount of research and you've made the case in my mind. But where else can people go to gather that in addition to your website?
Yeah, as far as I know, there are no mainstream, PhD, MD researchers or doctors that are operating from this understanding. We're so hung up on the idea that it's a vitamin and that it's essential, and nobody is willing to look past that to consider that it's harmful at all. And so even when people are presenting very clearly with the toxicity that's well documented in the medical literature, it's not considered.
Interesting.
There are most of the other sources that I've seen are lay people.
But yet all the studies that you've done are done by PhDs and,
Right.
chemists and stuff, and so they're just not making the connection between what happens when you're using vitamin or whatever you're calling it, because it's not a vitamin, but this idea of, because again, I think that's the way in terms of making it a mainstream. And I guess the question is, why hasn't that been the case yet? Is there where's the profit dollars in this thing for people to not bring it up?
Well, I mean, yeah, if there's if there's a profit motive to just not making the leap from the literature to practical application, sure. I mean, that might be a serious possibility, because look, you can't patent not eating vitamin A.
Exactly.
Right. And as and you can see on Wikipedia, the the nutrients are widely available, not patent medicines. Right. And the diseases that are caused by this toxicity are treated by patented, highly profitable drugs and medications.
Yeah.
So it really takes people like us to bridge the gap. Say, all right, well, you know what? In this aspect, Western medicine has failed us. It's up to us to take responsibility and take the lead, take control of our own health, and let Western medicine do what it's really good at. Dealing with epidemics. If I get hit by the bus, definitely don't take me to the essential oils salesman down the street. Take me to the hospital. But as soon as I'm good enough to get out of the hospital, I will take care of my healing process on my own. Right?
Great.
Yeah. And I appreciate it, because I think it's a conversation that needs to start, and I think we have some connections there with medical professionals and researchers with Stanford, and actually I'm connected with a group that does myofunctional therapy, so it's about sleep apnea, and that was one of the things also involved here. So I think there are many aspects, fields of medicine that you touch upon, and I hope for you to connect with these researchers and institutions who can who find this plausible, and maybe have a case to do some research so that this goes into more of the mainstream consciousness in this new paradigm that we have entered into. So
I would love that.
It's a conversation starter, and thanks for doing the work and creating that bridge.
Thank you for being open to hearing it, and to helping me, get this message out, and to help as many people as we can with this information. Yeah.
Can you just now again, what's your email? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah, my website is just my name, ericlevinson.com, and all my contact info is on there. My email address is levinson.eric@gmail.com. And for those of you who are, hearing this and want to, get direct contact with me, I have an intake form on there under the new client page. Fill that out, and then you can schedule a free consultation. Get on my calendar. We can have a discussion, talk about your issues, what you're dealing with, what you're struggling with, and see if this is the missing link.
Your plan that you put people on is more of a nutrition, kind of a new kind of basically repurposing their whole diet.
Yep. Yeah, it's food-based, nutrition-based. If you are, if you're poisoning yourself, you can continue to poison yourself and then treat the symptoms of poisoning, or you could stop poisoning yourself and then just give your body what it needs to heal. And what's amazing is that, look, for, millennia, human history, it did not take extreme measures for humans to be healthy. What's changed is that we've drastically increased our intake and exposure to aldehydes and to the chemicals that shut down our detoxification pathway of them. Things like glyphosate.
Right.